We have hurricane specialist Brian Norcross joining us. And of course, Brian, as you mentioned earlier, the ultimate impact of Melissa for Jamaica, that's going to start to come into focus today. But in terms of what's next, we're waiting for it to exit Cuba, and then we look towards the Bahamas, and even beyond that to Bermuda.
Yeah, so this has got a ways to go. Hopefully the folks in the Bahamas, in the southeastern Bahamas especially, southeastern is the central, but mostly the northern part of the southeastern Bahamas, are paying close attention and are getting in their safe spot there on the islands. They're not that populated in that part of the Bahamas, and generally the Bahamians have a very good plan. It's a very hurricane-ready country. In Jamaica, you mentioned Spalding, Jamaica, which is one of those cities up in the mountains. It's not down at the coast. So I suspect there are many places that are up in the mountains that it's going to take quite some time to hear from, just because the communications are out and no doubt the roads are compromised and so forth. So a bunch of cities are actually at higher elevations there. All right, here's the track that it took. It's got a whole bunch of bumps and wiggles on it, but if you notice, it looks a lot like the forecast track that was put out by the National Hurricane Center. Obviously, when you make a forecast, you don't try and forecast a wiggle. So just in a general sense, the forecasts really were outstanding by a number of the computer models. The European model was good. The Google DeepMind AI model was very good. Unfortunately, the U.S. GFS model was terrible early on in this. No doubt they'll look into that. So here's where we are right now. The storm is just about to exit the northern Cuban coast. As of the 8 a.m. advisory, estimated 105 mile per hour winds, 968 pressure from the Hurricane Center, moving north-northeast at 14. So now it's moving at 14. It's still not speeding along, but it is indeed moving, as slowly accelerated as this dip in the jet stream coming along here is reached down. And you can see on the satellite how it's dragging the upper clouds north. It's kind of stretching the storm out in this direction here, and that's going to continue as those winds pick up and the storm accelerates, moves up through the Bahamas and toward Bermuda. Look at it close up here. You can see that the core of it down in here has really gotten disrupted. It's always misleading when you have a hurricane near the coast, because when the circulation comes back around this way, sometimes the higher elevations enhance it. It looks like that's what's happening there in the vicinity of Holguin. That's a good-sized city there in eastern Cuba. Santiago de Cuba is a very big city in the eastern part of the country. But in any case, this is moving away, and it's moving into this part of the Bahamas. We can look at that here. There's where the cone is. And here you see now now that we have light over the storm, we can see it expanding in this direction. Look how much bigger the cloud canopy is this way than it is that way. That's the upper level winds kind of stretching it apart and going to pick it up and move it with some acceleration on off to the northeast. All right, so here's the estimate. This is as of 8 a.m. actually, the estimate from the National Hurricane Center of, well, this is actually kind of the current estimate. It's the 8 a.m. estimate moved ahead 2 hours of where the tropical storm force winds are. So if you're on one of those islands, you're watching and saying, well, it's not blowing that much where I am, but there might be a band nearby. The idea is the tropical storm force winds could be occurring in this area. That's about as far out as they think the 40 mile per hour plus winds will occur, but not everywhere in the yellow area. Then we get down here, and this is where the hurricane force gusts, and these are the hurricane force sustained winds down here in the dark red. So there's where we can see where the most likely impacts are going to be. All right, here we are, 10 a.m. this morning, Eastern time. Let's move forward in time, and here we go into the afternoon. Now the hurricane force gusts are approaching. You see Ackland's here, Crooked Island, and this is all sort of one island group there. And then Long Island here, especially the southern end of Long Island and the very tip here of Ragged Island. Looks like Exuma will be on the Exumas. This is a long group of islands there. The Exumas on the north side. Great Inagua here, because the main part of Great Inagua is on the west end, might very well get the winds coming in from the south or southwest. And Turks and Caicos just on the fringe, the way it looks right now. 110 mile per hour top end Category 2, maybe Category 3 hurricane in some spots moving through the islands. But, you know, when you have islands and a lot of empty space, where those bands go, it's impossible to know. Here we are now in the overnight hours. When it says Thursday a.m., it means nominally 2 a.m. In the morning. Here you see the time up here, Eastern time. And by that time, the winds should be letting up in the Bahamas. So this is going to be this afternoon into this evening, and then improving significantly overnight. We do have the hurricane warnings in effect for all of the central and southeastern Bahamas. That's how the Bahamians divide up the islands. So there's the line. This is the northwestern Bahamas, including Eleuthera, Nassau, Great Abaco, and Grand Bahama. No problems there from this storm. And then Turks and Caicos on the fringe there with a tropical storm warning, and still tropical storm warning for Haiti because of the outer bands. It's kind of feeding up into the system. You know, it's just really, I can't imagine what is going on there in that tortured country. I'm sure it's just horrible. And hurricane warnings for the eastern part of Cuba continue until the storm moves away. Okay, and then Bermuda is downstream and hurricane watch in effect. The way the cone has worked out. Remember, the cone doesn't necessarily contain the storm. In fact, in this case, it won't contain the storm because Melissa will grow in size as it weakens, and this jet stream energy feeds into it. So even outside the cone, Bermuda is going to feel a storm coming by, but this lowers the chance of kind of a direct hit of the core of the storm based on what we know now. And there's pretty high confidence in this track. The computer models agree that that's indeed where the storm is going. There was the landfall yesterday. So New Hope was right in the middle of it. And there, they see that kind of yellow and orange there. That was the core of the storm. So when we finally get direct evidence of what happened in Black River and Treasure Beach, I'm sure it's terrible. And in that area, you have two things, especially in Black River, you have two things going on. One is the storm surge pushing in here. Remember, it was forecast to be about 13 feet above the normal high tide. But the other is, Black River is called Black River because there's a big old river that comes down right next to the city. So, and all big mountains up in here. So the rain in those mountains is all going to come back down in here. So I'm just, fearful for what will happen. We've seen some video out of Black River, but only isolated, huge flooding video and damage to buildings. You have to be with 185 mile an hour winds. They seem to be the direct hit on the strongest winds. Also, we've seen damage out of here. Mandeville, pretty big city, up in the mountains, and other cities up in the mountains, all suffering because of the heavy rain and being elevated. They get the stronger winds. So all that was bad. Looking at the stats from yesterday, made landfall about 1 p.m., of course, at New Hope, Category 5. That was the estimate. The hurricane hunters flew back and forth, and that's what they found at the surface. In terms of their best estimates, the computer analysis was 215, and 252 or so mile per hour winds were measured just above the surface. So the National Hurricane Center is going to analyze all this data over the next several months, and in the spring we'll get the final report on Melissa and what their analysis is, if 185 was indeed the landfall final word on exactly what those winds were. Marissa and Stephen, and I talked about this storm looking like Hurricane Patricia from 2015, just visually, just looking at it. And that's what the computer analysis is, by the way. It looks at it, and then, by comparing and looking at various factors, figures out what the wind speed is. Well, Patricia looked exactly like this, but Patricia had a pressure of 872. So Patricia's pressure was, spectacularly low. It was almost as low as any pressure ever measured. One typhoon was in 870. So, we'll see in the final analysis what they say. But this was right at the top end of what any hurricane really can ever be in the Atlantic.
And when we look at how this thing was strengthening up until landfall, Brian, and perhaps maybe the pressure's a little lower, maybe the winds are ticked up just a bit, Phil Klotzbach made mention of consistent pressure readings that we now get, thanks, in large part to the hurricane hunters. But that didn't start until what, the late 70s? And you had mentioned the Florida Keys hurricane from 1935. I mean, I guess it's possible, and maybe this is a stupid question to ask, but it's possible that there have been lower pressured hurricanes. We just haven't had the means to record them in the Atlantic basin. But that 1935 was a unique case because it was over land.
Well, yeah, so that was a really strange case. First of all, you happen to have a guy there with a really good barometer and a lot of experience that happened to be right where that incredible hurricane came over the southern end of the Upper Keys, technically. So that was just so unusual to actually have that quality of measurement back then. We also had a super high quality measurement in Camille, for example, when it came ashore in southern Mississippi, where we were able to get the 900 millibar pressure from that storm. So this happens on occasion, but generally not. And certainly we didn't have any kind of satellite analysis. So that's why most of the Category 5 storms that we know about are all modern. Now, there are climate issues and so forth involved, but everybody that studies this thinks, yes, there used to be Category 5 hurricanes, but they're very ephemeral. A Category 5 hurricane is usually only Category 5 for less than a day. So you would have to have had some way of identifying it in that little window to know that it existed in the past. So our previous records before the 70s, really, even though we had some satellites in the 60s, but they weren't continuous. We've had continuous satellite observations since the 70s. All the record before that probably had Category 5s in it, but we just never knew, and there's no way to go back and reestablish that fact.
Yeah, it's just those storms that we've had, which are certainly benchmark storms. When you think of Camille, you think of the Florida Keys hurricane from 1935 that we can use as reference points. Yeah, that's fascinating discussion, but a lot to get through now as we've got this hurricane still moving through. Appreciate the insight once again. Fox Weather hurricane specialist Brian Norcross for us.